10 years of marriage is a special thing, especially when you're high school sweethearts like Rakim and Pearl. They grew up together, went to prom together, and fell in love under the bright Los Angeles sun. Now, a decade later, they were still madly in love. Their plan was simple, a romantic boat cruise to celebrate their 10th wedding anniversary. They didn't want just any boat. They rented a beautiful one, sleek and shiny, with a deck that sparkled under the Southern California stars. They invited 5 of their closest friends from high school to join them. These friends, who had shared countless laughs and secrets during their teenage years, were excited to reunite for the big celebration. Names like Mike, Lisa, Brian, Sarah, and Jake might not be famous, but they meant the world to Rakim and Pearl. The boat was theirs for the night, a floating haven for their love and friendship. It was a clear summer evening in LA as they boarded the boat, greeted with champagne and laughter. Everyone was dressed in their finest clothes, looking like a group of glamorous Hollywood stars. The boat gently set sail, leaving the twinkling lights of the city behind. As they sailed into the darkness of the Pacific Ocean, the night seemed full of promise. The soft swaying of the boat and the distant sound of waves against its sides created a tranquil atmosphere. Rakim and Pearl held hands, their smiles reflecting the happiness of a decade spent together. Their friends danced to the rhythm of the music playing softly in the background. Laughter echoed under the starlit sky, and for a while it felt like nothing could go wrong. Little did they know that this night, meant for celebration and togetherness, would soon take a chilling turn. Deep under the surface of their smiles and laughter, secrets and grudges from high school still festered, waiting for the perfect moment to resurface. And as the boat glided further into the darkness, the shadows of those secrets grew longer and more menacing. As the boat cruise continued, the atmosphere grew more relaxed, but beneath the surface, old grudges began to resurface. Mike and Lisa, once close friends, had a falling out over a high school prom incident. Brian and Jake, who used to be inseparable, had a bitter rivalry over a girl they both liked. Sarah, the quiet one of the group, had always been envious of Pearl's popularity back in high school. The friends tried to put their past conflicts behind them for the sake of Rakim and Pearl's celebration, but the tension simmered beneath their smiles. Small comments and glances exchanged between them hinted at the unresolved issues that still lingered after all these years. Mike, a tall and athletic guy, couldn't help but feel bitter about how Lisa had embarrassed him during that prom. He'd never forgotten how she'd laughed at him in front of everyone when he tripped and spilled punch all over his tuxedo. He blamed her for his high school humiliation, and as the night went on, he found it harder to hide his resentment. Lisa, a vivacious woman with a quick wit, had always seen herself as the life of the party. She resented Mike for holding a grudge over a silly high school incident. She couldn't understand why he couldn't just let it go and have a good time. But every time she looked into Mike's eyes, she saw that same hurt and anger, and it made her uneasy. Brian and Jake, the 2 guys who had once shared secrets and dreams, were now locked in a silent competition. It all started when they both fell for the same girl, a popular cheerleader named Emily, back in high school. It had led to a bitter rivalry that had torn their friendship apart. Now they sat on opposite sides of the boat, casting occasional glances at each other. Brian, with his muscular build, felt a sense of superiority, having won Emily's heart in the end. Jake, more introverted but equally intelligent, resented Brian for what he saw as betrayal. He believed that Brian had stolen Emily from him, and it still stung. Sarah, the quiet observer in the group, had always harbored a hidden envy towards Pearl. Pearl's charisma and popularity had often overshadowed Sarah's presence in high school. She'd always been the wallflower, while Pearl shone as the prom queen. Sarah had never forgotten those feelings of inadequacy and jealousy, and they had festered over the years. As the night continued, these old wounds threatened to rupture the fragile peace on the boat. The laughter and camaraderie that had initially filled the air began to feel forced, and the once close friends found themselves drifting apart. Each of them carried their own secrets and resentments, and it was only a matter of time before those secrets would come bubbling to the surface, potentially with disastrous consequences. The night held both the promise of celebration and the lurking threat of something darker, something they could no longer ignore. The boat sailed further into the night, and as the stars above shone brightly, the friends aboard embraced the atmosphere of celebration. The deck was adorned with soft lights, casting a warm glow over the group. The sound of gentle waves lapping against the sides of the boat provided a soothing backdrop. Rakim and Pearl, still deeply in love, danced together under the moonlight. Their smiles radiated happiness, and their friends watched with joy. It was a touching moment, reminding everyone of the power of love and friendship. Mike and Lisa, despite their lingering grudge, couldn't help but get swept up in the romantic mood. They took to the dance floor, laughing and spinning around, momentarily putting their old conflicts aside. Brian and Jake, though still distant, both found themselves entranced by the serene beauty of the night. The soft breeze ruffled Brian's hair as he gazed out at the dark ocean. Lost in thought, Jake leaned against the railing, staring at the star-studded sky, his mind wandering. Sarah, who had always been quiet, watched her friends with a mixture of longing and sadness. She wished for a love like Rakim and Pearl's, and she yearned for the kind of friendships she saw around her. But her lingering envy kept her on the outskirts of the festivities. As the night wore on, the group shared stories and memories, reliving their high school days. They laughed at the crazy stunts they pulled and the wild adventures they'd had. It felt like a chance to recapture their youth, but beneath the surface, tension still simmered. The unresolved conflicts and jealousies refused to stay buried. Mike and Lisa, in a moment of dancing, exchanged sharp words that hung in the air. Brian and Jake, lost in their thoughts, couldn't shake the feeling of rivalry. Sarah, though trying to fit in, couldn't help but feel like an outsider. The boat cruise, meant to be a night of celebration, had become a complicated dance of emotions. The friends were all on the same boat, both literally and metaphorically, with a growing sense of unease. They were navigating the treacherous waters of their past, and they couldn't foresee the storm that lay ahead. As the night grew darker, the boat sailed farther into the ocean, leaving the city lights far behind. The friends were isolated, surrounded by nothing but the vast expanse of the sea and the mysteries it held. It was a night filled with beauty, but it was also a night where hidden tensions threatened to boil over, casting a shadow over the celebrations and setting the stage for the unimaginable events that would unfold. As the night deepened, the friends continued to enjoy themselves on the boat. The soft music played in the background, and the gentle sway of the boat added to the ambiance. Rakim and Pearl, still the center of attention, danced and laughed, completely unaware of the dark cloud looming over the celebration. But as the clock ticked on, and the moon moved higher in the sky, the joyous atmosphere began to change. The laughter that had filled the air started to fade, replaced by an uneasy silence. Mike and Lisa, who had momentarily set aside their grudge, found themselves drifting apart once again. Brian and Jake's rivalry became more pronounced as they exchanged icy glances across the deck. Sarah watched them all, her envy turning to a growing sense of discomfort. As the friends moved around the boat, exploring its various decks and rooms, they began to notice something was amiss. Doors that should have been open were mysteriously locked, and strange noises echoed through the narrow hallways. It was as if the boat itself had taken on a sinister, unfamiliar quality. Then, it happened. In the dimly lit corridor, Sarah stumbled upon a room with the door slightly ajar. She pushed it open, expecting to find a quiet space to gather her thoughts. Instead, her scream pierced the night, cutting through the hushed tension like a knife. The others rushed to Sarah's side, their faces filled with fear and confusion. Inside the room, a scene of horror awaited them. Pearl lay lifeless on the floor, surrounded by a pool of blood. Her once beautiful dress was stained crimson, and her eyes stared vacantly at the ceiling. Rakim's cry of anguish filled the air as he fell to his knees beside his beloved wife. The shock and horror that gripped the friends were palpable. The boat that had been a symbol of celebration had now become a gruesome crime scene. Pearl had been brutally murdered, her body bearing multiple stab wounds. The once festive atmosphere now hung heavy with dread. Panic and disbelief spread among the friends as they tried to make sense of the horrifying sight before them. Mike and Lisa, Brian and Jake, Sarah and Rakim himself all stood there, their faces pale, their minds racing. The thought that one of them could have committed such a heinous act was almost incomprehensible. But the evidence was clear. and there was no escaping the gruesome reality. The boat, once a place of joy and celebration, had become a nightmarish tableau of death. As they called out for help and the authorities were alerted, the friends found themselves thrust into a nightmare they could never have imagined. The mystery of who had killed Pearl and why hung heavily in the air, and it was a puzzle that would haunt them for the days and weeks to come. The once tightly knit group was now bound together by a shared horror, and they were about to embark on a journey into darkness from which there might be no return. As the shock of Pearl's gruesome murder settled in, a suffocating silence hung over the group. Their once strong bonds of friendship were unraveling in the face of this unimaginable tragedy. Rakim, who had been kneeling by Pearl's lifeless body, was overcome with grief. Tears streamed down his face as he clutched her lifeless hand, unable to comprehend the loss of his beloved wife. The pain in his eyes was visible to all, but it also fueled suspicion. After all, who could rule out the possibility that he might have had a motive? The other friends were in varying states of shock. Mike, who had been locked in a grudge with Lisa, felt a crushing sense of guilt. He had argued with her earlier, and now she was dead. Lisa, too, couldn't escape the weight of suspicion. Her tense relationship with Mike had escalated moments before the gruesome discovery. Brian and Jake's rivalry had turned into a cold, silent feud. Each man had eyed the other with jealousy and resentment, and now they were both under the spotlight. Sarah, always quiet and on the fringes of the group, seemed like the least likely suspect. But her feelings of inadequacy and envy had grown, leading her to wonder if she was somehow involved. Outside the room where Pearl's body lay, the police had arrived. Detectives began their investigation, asking questions and examining the crime scene. The boat, once a symbol of celebration, was now a place of horror and suspicion. As the hours passed, the friends were each questioned separately. The detectives probed into their relationships, their actions leading up to the discovery, and their possible motives. Tensions ran high as accusations were thrown around, each friend trying to deflect suspicion onto someone else. Mike accused Lisa of having a vendetta against Pearl, suggesting that she might have been the one who committed the murder. Lisa, in turn, pointed to Mike's outbursts of anger and their unresolved high school grudge as a possible motive. Brian and Jake's rivalry became more apparent as they each blamed the other for causing the tension that led to this tragedy. Sarah, the quiet observer, struggled to explain her feelings of envy towards Pearl but vehemently denied any involvement in the murder. Rakim, who had lost the love of his life, faced the most intense scrutiny. Detectives probed into his relationship with Pearl, delving into any possible motives within their marriage. The police had a difficult task ahead of them, sifting through the tangled web of emotions, grudges, and secrets that had built up over the years. The friends, once bound by their shared history, were now entangled in a web of suspicion and doubt. As the investigation continued, it became clear that the police didn't have an easy task ahead of them, and the truth behind Pearl's murder remained elusive, shrouded in the shadows of the past. The boat had transformed from a place of celebration to a grim crime scene. Detectives moved about with purpose, their faces grave as they meticulously gathered evidence and questioned the friends one by one. Inside the room where Pearl's lifeless body lay, the detectives worked diligently. They carefully examined the murder weapon, a bloody knife, and dusted for fingerprints. They took photographs of the crime scene, capturing every detail, and collected samples of the blood for analysis. As they worked, the detectives couldn't help but notice the friends' strained relationships and the undercurrent of tension among them. It was clear that each of them had a motive to want Pearl dead, dating back to unresolved grudges from high school. This added a layer of complexity to the investigation. Outside the room, the friends were separated from one another, placed in different parts of the boat, and questioned individually. The detectives probed into their pasts, asking about their relationships with Pearl, their high school history, and any conflicts they might have had. It was an uncomfortable experience, as each friend had to confront their own feelings of guilt, anger, and suspicion. Mike and Lisa, who had their own recent argument, were grilled separately. Their exchange of words just before the discovery of the body raised questions. Mike admitted to his grudge against Lisa for embarrassing him at prom, but he vehemently denied any involvement in Pearl's murder. Lisa, too, pointed fingers at Mike for their heated argument but denied any knowledge of the crime. Brian and Jake were questioned about their rivalry over a girl from high school. The detectives probed into their recent interactions and whether their jealousy had escalated to violence. Both men denied any wrongdoing, but their icy glances at each other didn't go unnoticed. Sarah, the quiet observer, found herself in the hot seat as well. Detectives inquired about her feelings of envy towards Pearl and her interactions with the group. She admitted to her jealousy but insisted she had nothing to do with the murder. Rakim, grieving the loss of his wife, faced the most intense scrutiny. Detectives delved into the details of their marriage, searching for any possible motives. Rakim's love for Pearl was undeniable, but they had to explore every angle. The investigation was far from straightforward. The boat's isolated location on the ocean added an eerie dimension to the proceedings. The detectives struggled to piece together a timeline of events leading up to the murder. Alibis were scrutinized, and inconsistencies in the friends' stories were noted. As the hours passed, the atmosphere on the boat became increasingly tense. The friends, who had once shared laughter and celebrations, now sat in isolation, haunted by the specter of suspicion. They realized that their past actions and unresolved grudges had come back to haunt them, with potentially devastating consequences. The police investigation was far from over, and the detectives faced the daunting task of untangling the web of motives, secrets, and emotions that had led to this horrifying crime. The truth was elusive, hidden beneath layers of deception and betrayal, and the friends were left to wonder if justice would ever be served, or if the mystery of Pearl's murder would remain unsolved. As the police investigation continued, the friends on the boat were trapped in a nightmarish limbo. The once strong bonds that had held them together were now strained to the breaking point, and the weight of suspicion bore down on each of them. The detectives worked tirelessly, sifting through the evidence and trying to make sense of the conflicting stories and emotions. The boat, once a place of celebration, had become a confounding labyrinth of secrets and grudges. Mike and Lisa, who had argued just before the discovery of Pearl's body, found themselves replaying that heated exchange in their minds. Guilt and anger churned within them. They couldn't escape the fact that their argument had been the last interaction before the murder, and it weighed heavily on their conscience. Brian and Jake's rivalry over a girl from their past was brought into sharp focus. The detectives dug deeper into their history, uncovering old emails and messages that hinted at their lingering resentment. Both men claimed they had put their differences aside, but the evidence suggested otherwise. Sarah's feelings of envy towards Pearl couldn't be ignored. The detectives gently probed into her emotions, trying to understand if her jealousy had pushed her to commit such a heinous act. Sarah insisted she was innocent, her voice trembling with fear and sadness. Rakim, still grieving for Pearl, faced intense scrutiny. Detectives questioned the depth of his love for his wife, searching for any hidden motives. Rakim's heartache was genuine, but they couldn't afford to dismiss him as a suspect. The boat's isolated location in the dark expanse of the ocean added to the eeriness of the situation. Detectives struggled to create a timeline of events leading up to the murder, and alibis were examined with a fine-tooth comb. Inconsistencies in the friends' stories were noted, adding to the complexity of the case. As the investigation delved into their pasts, long-buried secrets began to surface. The friends had shared their youth, but they had also hidden their darkest moments and betrayals from one another. Mike revealed the humiliation he had felt when Lisa had embarrassed him at prom. He confessed to the deep anger he had carried all these years, but swore he would never harm anyone. Lisa admitted to her own regrets, acknowledging the guilt she felt for her actions in high school. She argued passionately that she would never resort to violence. Brian and Jake, cornered by the detectives' questions, finally confronted the jealousy that had driven a wedge between them. They confessed to their rivalry but insisted they had put it behind them, united by the tragic events. Sarah, too, opened up about her long-standing envy of Pearl. She admitted to feelings of inadequacy but vehemently denied any involvement in the murder. Rakim, devastated by the loss of his wife, bared his soul. He shared the deep love he had for Pearl, emphasizing that he would never harm her. His grief was palpable, and it left the detectives torn between sympathy and suspicion. The investigation was far from over, and the boat remained a haunting place, filled with memories of both joy and sorrow. The friends had laid bare their secrets, but the truth remained elusive, shrouded in a thick fog of deception and betrayal. As the detectives wrestled with the tangled web of motives and emotions, they knew that they were far from solving the mystery of Pearl's murder. The friends, once united by their shared history, were now separated by a chasm of doubt and fear, and the specter of the past continued to haunt them, threatening to destroy not only their friendships but their lives as well. The boat, now marred by the specter of suspicion and tragedy, continued to sail through the dark waters off the coast of Los Angeles. The friends aboard, once inseparable, were now divided by a growing sense of unease and mistrust. As the investigation progressed, it brought with it a series of unexpected twists and turns that would further complicate their already tangled lives. The detectives, determined to uncover the truth behind Pearl's murder, dug deeper into the friends' pasts. They scrutinized phone records, social media profiles, and any communication that might shed light on the events leading up to that fateful night. Mike and Lisa, who had exchanged sharp words before the discovery of the body, had their cell phone records examined. Strangely, it was revealed that their phones had been used to call each other repeatedly in the moments just before the murder. This revelation left both of them dumbfounded, as neither could explain why they had been calling each other at that crucial time. Brian and Jake, who had claimed to have put their rivalry behind them, were confronted with a startling discovery. A series of text messages from the weeks leading up to the boat cruise revealed that their animosity had not completely dissipated. In fact, the messages hinted at an escalating tension between them, raising further suspicions. Sarah, the quiet friend with feelings of envy, had her online activities scrutinized. It was discovered that she had been researching news articles about unsolved murders and murder investigations in the weeks leading up to the cruise. This discovery added a layer of complexity to her role in the investigation. Rakim's phone records were examined as well, but they revealed nothing out of the ordinary. His calls and messages were consistent with his grieving state. The detectives couldn't find any incriminating evidence against him, but his unwavering love for Pearl still made him a person of interest. As these twists and turns unfolded, the friends found themselves caught in a vortex of confusion and fear. They couldn't explain the strange phone calls, the escalating tension between Brian and Jake, or Sarah's unsettling online searches. The boat had become a pressure cooker of suspicion, and the once solid friendships were eroding before their eyes. The detectives, while uncovering these puzzling details, also faced external pressures. The media had caught wind of the sensational murder on the boat, and the story was making headlines across Los Angeles. Reporters hounded the detectives for updates, and the pressure to solve the case intensified. The boat cruise, which had started as a celebration of love and friendship, had devolved into a nightmare of secrets, grudges, and hidden motives. The friends were trapped in a web of suspicion, unable to escape the chilling realization that one among them might be responsible for the heinous crime. As the investigation entered a critical phase, with more questions than answers, the friends clung to the hope that the truth would eventually come to light. But the path to justice was fraught with uncertainty, and the boat sailed deeper into the heart of darkness, where the next twist could shatter their lives once and for all. As the boat continued to sail through the dark waters, the friends found themselves in a state of heightened tension. The twists and turns of the investigation had left them bewildered, each one grappling with the possibility that someone among them was responsible for Pearl's murder. The detectives, determined to crack the case, decided to gather all the friends in one room for a final confrontation. The atmosphere in the room was charged with a mix of fear, anger, and despair. It was the moment of truth, where accusations and defenses would collide. Mike and Lisa, who had exchanged sharp words and peculiar phone calls before the murder, faced a barrage of questions from the detectives. The tension between them was palpable. Mike insisted that their arguments were unrelated to Pearl's murder and that the phone calls had been coincidental. Lisa, on the other hand, maintained her innocence, but couldn't explain the calls either. Brian and Jake, who had a history of rivalry and conflicting text messages, were grilled next. The detectives pushed them to reveal the true extent of their enmity. Brian, his face flushed with anger, admitted to their ongoing feud, but vehemently denied any involvement in the murder. Jake, too, confessed to the rivalry, but insisted he was not the killer. Sarah, the quiet friend with a penchant for researching unsolved murders, was the next to be questioned. The detectives pressed her about her online activities and whether they were related to Pearl's murder. Sarah, on the verge of tears, explained that she had been looking into murder cases out of morbid curiosity, but had no connection to the crime. Rakim, still grieving deeply for his wife, faced a grueling interrogation. The detectives, acknowledging his unwavering love for Pearl, questioned whether he might have committed the murder in a fit of rage. Rakim's emotions were raw, and he defended his innocence with every fiber of his being. As the confrontation continued, emotions ran high, accusations were thrown, and denials echoed through the room. The once strong friendships were on the brink of collapse as the weight of suspicion bore down on everyone. Then, in the midst of the chaos, a surprising revelation came to light. A security camera on the boat, previously overlooked, provided a critical piece of evidence. The footage showed a shadowy figure entering and leaving the room where Pearl's body was discovered. The figure's identity was concealed, but the detectives now had a lead to follow. This revelation shifted the dynamics of the confrontation. The friends, while still grappling with their own suspicions and guilt, realized that an unknown intruder might have been responsible for the murder. The shock of this discovery brought a temporary ceasefire to the tension in the room. The detectives, armed with the new evidence, vowed to intensify their efforts to identify the mysterious figure in the security footage. The friends, though shaken and divided, clung to a glimmer of hope that the truth was within reach. The boat, once a symbol of joy and celebration, had now become a battleground of conflicting emotions and dark revelations. The final confrontation had provided a sliver of clarity, but the road to justice was still shrouded in uncertainty. The friends were left with a chilling realization. The murderer was still among them, waiting to be unmasked, and the journey to the truth was far from over. The boat sailed on through the dark waters, carrying with it a burden of sorrow, suspicion, and fear. The friends, once united by their shared history, were now fractured by doubt and mistrust. The revelation of the security footage showing an unknown intruder had given them a glimmer of hope, but the mystery was far from solved. As the days passed, the detectives worked tirelessly to identify the shadowy figure in the security footage. They reviewed every scrap of evidence, interviewed potential witnesses, and scoured the boat for clues. The media frenzy surrounding the case only added to the pressure on the investigators, who were determined to bring Pearl's killer to justice. The friends, still gathered on the boat, grappled with a mixture of relief and anxiety. The possibility that one of them had committed the murder had been temporarily set aside, but the identity of the intruder remained unknown. They clung to the hope that this new lead would ultimately exonerate them and reveal the truth. Rakim, consumed by grief and guilt, was haunted by the events of that fateful night. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had failed to protect his beloved wife. Every corner of the boat held painful memories of their love and happiness, now tainted by tragedy. Mike and Lisa, Brian and Jake and Sarah, all felt the weight of suspicion lift, but the scars of their strained relationships remained. The wounds from their unresolved grudges were still fresh, and the specter of the murder had taken a toll on their friendships. As the investigation reached its climax, the detectives made a breakthrough. They identified the mysterious intruder as a crew member who had been working on the boat that night. His motives remained unclear, but the evidence pointed to his involvement in the murder. With this critical piece of information in hand, the detectives confronted the crew member, who ultimately confessed to the crime. It was revealed that he had harbored a deep grudge against Pearl, dating back to a personal vendetta unrelated to the friend's high school history. He had used his knowledge of the boat's layout to commit the murder and had evaded suspicion by blending in with the crew. the revelation of the true perpetrator brought a mix of relief and shock. The friends, who had been torn apart by suspicion, were finally vindicated. The weight of guilt and mistrust lifted, replaced by a shared sense of sorrow and loss. As the boat returned to the shores of Los Angeles, the friends faced the daunting task of rebuilding their shattered lives. They had weathered a storm of suspicion and betrayal, and their bonds had been tested to the breaking point. But the resolution of the mystery had given them closure, and they clung to the memories of their high school days and the love they once shared. Rakim, still mourning the loss of his wife, found solace in the knowledge that she had not been betrayed by those closest to her. Mike and Lisa, Brian and Jake and Sarah, despite their past conflicts, found a renewed appreciation for the preciousness of friendship. The boat, which had been a scene of celebration and tragedy, now carried with it the echoes of the past and the promise of a brighter future. The friends had survived a harrowing ordeal, and as they disembarked, they knew that their lives had been forever changed by the events of that fateful night. Pearl's memory would live on in their hearts, a testament to the enduring power of love and friendship.